Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike Nelson here. I wanted to do this kind of short overview of what exactly is in the physiologic flexibility certification because I know it can be confusing. And when you sign up and when you enroll, you'll come to this window here. It says, hey, you're enrolled. Again, you still get private access to myself to ask any questions that you want. All of it's in an online learning environment, so you can look at this whenever you want, as long as you have online access. And you'll have access to this as long as you want. You have lifetime access. It's 100% online, so you can go through at your own pace. Take as much time as you need to do each component. So I'm going to click into the preview here. So this is just the welcome one, and we're telling you it's broken up into 4 areas: temperature, pH, fuels, which is ketones, glucose or lactate, O2, and CO2. And this is just a brief overview of what you can expect on that. And then if we go back one, what you'll notice is it's organized per intervention. So we have intervention number 1, which is temperature, intervention 2, pH, fuels, breathing, and then, hey, you passed. Woohoo! Awesome. Now within, excuse me, each one of these areas, there is going to be kind of two, like a coin. You got 2 sides of the same coin. So for temperature, we're going to have a high temp and a low temp. So high temp is going to be heat, low temp is obviously going to be cold. pH, you're going to have a high temp and a low temp, but it's going to be pH. So you're going to have a high pH and a low pH. So you're going to be 2 ends of the same spectrum. For fuels, we've got blood glucose and ketones. Now, an offshoot of blood glucose is going to be lactate, but it was just easier to go into the high end of carbohydrate use, where you spin off lactate, and then the high end of fat use, where you spin off ketones. So on one end of the spectrum, we've got ketones on this end, carbohydrates, also some lactate on that end. And then breathing. The 2 main things that we're exchanging all the time are going to be oxygen and CO2. So again, 2 sides of the air or the breathing coin are oxygen and CO2. So those are your 4 intervention areas. Each one of those 4 intervention areas has 2 sides. So imagine you've got 4 coins and you've got 8 sides. So within each side, you will have 5 explicit action items. So for temperature control, for hot, for sauna, you will have 5 explicit action items that you'll have the system and you'll know exactly what to do with that. The same with cold. You can go through the whole area on cold, and at the end you'll have 5 action items for cold, and you know the system to tell you which one to start, either yourself or your client. Now within that framework, because I'm huge on frameworks, we have kind of 3 areas, just like the Flex Diet Cert. We have our big picture, which is going to evolve over the course of all the modules. So if I dive into temperature here, heat and cold, I've got big picture overview, which is going to be module 1. So there's going to be 8 modules of the big picture overview. And so when I click into this, I've got my video here. I can click on it. Hey, where? And then as we go through, it's going to walk you through the different components, the background, what you need to know. As a side note, I did put all of these unlisted in YouTube. The reason I did that is some people wanted to screencast them to their TV or a different app. And the cool part is YouTube will work with pretty much every app. So if you want to run this on your phone, you can. If you want to broadcast it to your TV, your laptop, whatever. I know some people listen to them in their car. Totally can do all of that. That works fine. So back to the big picture. The big picture is going to evolve over 8 different ones. And that's going to tell you why you want to train these homeostatic regulators. What are the benefits? What are concepts like hormesis, anti-fragility, all the other ones we talk about. And so that big picture will evolve over the course of the 4 interventions here. So if you skip all the way ahead, excuse me, to the end, You'll see there's a big picture there also. There's also quizzes in here after each one, so you can make sure you're knowing how to do it. And we've got our technical, I guess you could say, primer on each one. So within each one, so for hot, we have a technical primer. I have 1 hour to tell you everything you need to know about why heat is beneficial, what are the pros, what are the cons, why is heat plus exercise better, all of those things. We go through all of that. There is some super nerdy stuff with graphs and stuff too, but I try to make it somewhat interesting and put different, memes and all that other stuff in there. So I try not to make it all just super hardcore. Try to make it interesting as best we can. So my challenge when I set this up was I had about 1 hour to tell you all the technical components of hot and cold, etc. Now, I'll be honest, in this one, you'll notice a couple of them have cold part 1 and part 2. And when you get into the breathing area, there's a part 1, part 2, I think into part 3. So I tried for multiple times to condense it. And what I realized was there's probably only so much you can condense it. But I think I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out. Most of these are not horribly long, but they are a little bit more lengthy at times, just because of all the material to actually cover. Now, again, doing these, trying to make it somewhat interesting, so you don't necessarily need to have a super hardcore background in science. I also stuck in protocols here. So this is sauna used for health and athletic benefits. What does that look like? Hydration, safety, all that kind of stuff, blah, 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 contraindications. How much should you actually do? So in areas where you still have your 5 action items, and I felt like people really wanted to know more explicitly what to do, and they wanted it at a glance in a one-page sort of cheat sheet, I have that. And then I also have some advanced stuff that I've never released anywhere else, at least to date I haven't. So this one's for cold water immersion. Now again, some of these are a little bit for, I guess you could say theoretical. There's not a ton of hard science on this, but I've been doing cold water immersion mostly daily up until about March of this year for almost going on 4 years, and use it with various athletes and stuff. So what I found is you can use it in different ways. So for example here, if your goal is just overall athletic performance, your temperature, you probably want a moderate temperature. We go over what that is in the course. Duration, you probably want to be a little bit longer. Exposure, like how much of your body do you want exposed to the cold? You probably want a larger amount. However, if you want a mental boost, you just want to feel really good. If you can control temperature, you want to be very, very cold, like probably below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. However, your duration there is going to be very short, 30, 60, 70 seconds, and I explain durations here. And exposure, you also want large. You want to get as much as your body into the cold as you possibly can. So again, depending upon what you want to use it for, increases in HRV, fat loss, immune function, glucose health, etc. We give you at least a rough guideline of what you should do. Now you will notice that I'm not telling you, well, hey, you need to be in the cold water immersion for exactly 3.47 seconds or 3.89 minutes if you're doing this or that. We just can't quite get to that level of granularity yet, but you'll still know exactly what to do. You'll know the progressions, and I don't want anyone to not take action because they were not sure what to do. And again, you can always email me once you're in the course too, and I'll answer your questions. And then we've got some other stuff too, like I did a bonus item here, a deep dive on a cold and its effects upon metabolism, if people really want to go down that route. We've got expert interviews, so on the cold we've got Dave Whitley, and then we've got my good friend Akshay, who's working to be the first human to do a solo crossing unassisted across Antarctica. So I was helping him with, consulting with him, doing some nutrition stuff, helping him out. So we got a big interview with him since he has a ton of reference with exercise and cold, probably more than almost any human alive right now. Then we got our full references. So if you want to take a deep dive and you're like, hey, what's going on? I really want all the references. These are the ones that were included primarily in the course. There's also some other beneficial ones, additional ones there. Again, I could list way more than this if I wanted to, but I tried to limit to the references that were actually useful. I want to say, don't quote me on the exact number, I think the total course has over 300 references, and I want to say when I was developing it, I think I ended up pulling, almost 700 or something. Just some stupid numbers. But not all of them made it into the course because they weren't necessarily applicable or they didn't really fit. It wasn't necessarily that the data was bad, but again, this is trying to get it down to about a 28-hour course or so. So once you get through temperature, then obviously we've got all the same stuff here for pH. Same thing, big overview here. This is module 3. pH is going to be low and high, part 1, part 2. And so on some of these, what I had to do is break them up a little bit. So the pH was really hard to disentangle from low and high when I was talking about the theory. Because on the theory, a lot of it is going to overlap. Because when you think about what pH is more of a spectrum, and it's not necessarily a high or a low. So we're looking at pH and energy and everything else. But when we did the action items, we were able to split those out into action items for trying to target low pH, everything from nasal breathing, moderate airflow, longer exhale, breathing frequency, heart rate. So you'll know exactly what to do if you need to target lower or higher pH interventions. Then we got more expert interviews here. My good friend, former Navy SEAL medic, Rick Alexander, how to deal with stress and tools to downregulate. My good friend Christina Hoyer is a former Navy rescue swimmer, how to walk through stress and trauma. And then there's a quiz for that. Most of these do have slides. Most of these do have references and everything. If there's anything those that are missing, let me know. There's one area I'm still filling in right now. We've got the next section is going to be blood glucose. So I think this is a very underappreciated area. Everyone talks about blood glucose, and for good reason, but I wasn't able to find any really good primers that go into it. Like, what is it? How is it regulated? Why do we need to regulate it? What do we do for testing? What if your blood glucose is high or low? Now, again, this isn't to be any medical advice at all. This is just to tell you if you're looking at healthy ranges, where do you want to be? What should your AM glucose be post-meal? We get into some other testing like HbA1c and other things you can look at through your physician or if you're qualified to look at blood work. But some of them you can do yourself. Like you can get a blood glucose thing and poke your finger right now, see what's going on with that. You can get continuous glucose monitors now, which is great. And then we talk about ketones, why ketones are useful. Now, again, this might be in the context of a longer fast, but this can also be in the context of supplemental forms of ketones and how your body is creating them. Again, some of it is quite technical, but we do our best to try to make it as easy to understand as possible. And then we have our 5 action items for blood glucose and ketones. So action item area number 1 is how to lower blood glucose if it's on the higher side. Again, this is not to treat anyone who's a diabetic. This is just for performance ranges. Because if your blood glucose is going towards the higher end of the spectrum, then you have some issues that you need to work on. And then how would you do things for lowering it? So keto jumpstart, CGMs, templates, how would you do all that kind of stuff? Then we have our expert interviews with my good buddy Dr. Dom D'Agostino, part 1 and 2. Good buddy Dr. Tommy Wood. We've got some ketone esters, a deep dive with Dr. Brianna Stubbs. And I have one more ketone one I'm probably going to put in here with my buddy Mike Chesney, who I work with also over at Tecton. So Tecton is an exogenous ketone. Full disclosure, I do work for them as a scientific advisor. This course was primarily developed before my work with them, though. So complete slide deck here. All your slides, all that stuff is there. For God's sakes, please don't share or copyright any of them. That would really piss me off. here's our references. Those are all in the screen there if you want a separate list of your references. And we've got your quiz. So moving on to the very last one here, we've got intervention number 4, breathing, which is oxygen and CO2. So we've got our last big pictures here. And then we talk about oxygen. Like, what is your body doing to regulate oxygen? Why is this important? Everything from breath holds, how respiratory physiology is functioning. Now, this section, I will admit, does get kind of technical. This was probably the hardest area for me to do. I think some of these I ended up redoing, like, Christ. Well, some of them I think I ended up redoing 4 or 5 times, to be honest. Because with breathing, we've got oxygen regulation and CO2. But these can be changed by breathing rate, how deep you're breathing, exercise, also pressure differences such as altitude training. So I did a whole area here on altitude training about not necessarily that you need to do it or not, but it's a really cool way of illustrating what's actually going on with your physiology and how if you're not even training at altitude or not, how you can leverage that. Found some super cool data on teams that happen to perform, professional teams at altitude. So like the Utah Jazz, obviously in NFL, you've got the Broncos and some other teams to look to see, is that really a performance advantage? What can we use that to our advantage if we're just training at, normal sea level like probably most of you are? Then we've got that. I actually split this out into 3 sections. I tried to get it as best I could. Then we've got carbon dioxide, part 1, part 2. So why this is important, what you need to know about it, everything from that to CO2 tolerance, training masks, altitude, pretty much any question I could think of in relation to breathing and what's going on with that. Everything from crazy stuff I found with like beta-adrenergic blockade and anesthetized rats and how that affects things. And so quite extensive. I'm pretty happy with how that actually turned out, to be honest. That was a monster pain in my butt to do. And then what I also did was I did what I call like a technical wrap-up of a high stress and respiratory rate and a client with poor focus and energy. So again, this is a theoretical framework for trying to break down that if you have an Oura Ring or you've got Garmin or maybe you've got an Apple Watch, a lot of these now will measure respiratory rate. So overnight respiratory rate, I think, will be the next hot trend to look at. So again, I work part-time for Rapid Health Optimization with Dr. Andy Gelpin, Dan Gardner, all those wonderful people over there. I've talked to Andy about this quite a bit, and last I talked to him, he was in agreement that respiratory rate overnight gives us some really cool data that not a lot of people are using. If your respiratory rate is high, you are 100% leaving performance on the table. You are pushing yourself to be more sympathetic than what you need. This is actually also independent of VO2 max. I've seen clients with high respiratory rate with amazing VO2 max. Again, that's not always the case. But why is that an issue? And then more importantly, how can you identify it and what can you do about it? And the cool part is, like, this is at the end. So now that you understand kind of respiratory physiology, breathing, everything else, you'll be able to dive into that. And then we got our action items. All right, this is cool, but like, what the heck do I do with any of this? Right, so things like the nasal exhale test. How do you actually test this diagnostically in clients for performance? Again, we're not trying to evaluate anyone's health status or diagnose anything here. But this is a great test, which I blatantly stole from Brian McKenzie, wonderful people over at Shift Adapt. And it's really good. I've been using this on my own clients now for 5 years now, maybe. And it's super interesting. So if you want to know CO2 tolerance and you want to know a non-invasive way to kind of measure some of these things, and this can all be done in an online environment, super, super useful. In my opinion, everybody should be doing that with 100% of their clients. Then we've got action items number 6 through 10, everything from transitions and exercise. Should you be doing like Wim Hof breathing, like before you get ready? What should you be doing post set? And here's a hint, nasal in, mouth out. And then how do you progress from there? So how do you use breathing techniques to change state and to help performance? These are other things too, mechanics, everything else there. All right. And then we've got some bonus. Again, you'll notice that I'm really hammering on this respiratory rate again. I just find it's a well underused area that is relatively easy to do and to check. Expert interviews, we've got James Nestor, author of the book Breath or Breathe, Rob Wilson from Shift Adapt. Again, full slide decks, full references, quiz, all that stuff is there. So we've got, I think, overall like 9 expert interviews in here also, and then you'll get my private email to ask any questions. So I'm pretty happy with how all of this turned out. It was a monster pain in my butt to do it. I started looking at the concepts of physiologic flexibility now going out over almost like 11 years. So it's taken quite a while to piece all these things together. And again, my biased opinion is once you're pretty good, you get like around a B on nutrition and recovery. Like this is, in my opinion, the next thing to look at. And most of the data so far, as we've been going forward, has been in agreement with this. We've got a lot more data coming out. And the last component of this is a lot of these things you don't necessarily have to do independently of themselves. Like some of the breathing stuff you need to do, yes. But what's super cool is that any of this can be done in addition to what your clients are doing. And most of it can be done what I call kind of the combo platter. So if you have someone who lives in a warm environment and they don't have a sauna, you could exercise outside. Or there's different things you can do to expose yourself to heat while you're already doing exercise. It doesn't really cost you any more time. Again, the caveat is you want to make sure you know what you're doing and you're doing it in the correct way to get the best adaptations, because if you just drop someone in the heat, you can really kind of mess with their performance quite a bit. And the last part I wanted to mention too is that one of the big questions I get all the time is about cardiovascular training, and I would say for very, very good reason. And we go over that primarily in the pH section. So in the pH section, we're looking at things that are going to increase pH, lower pH, ways you can potentially buffer pH, which there's some supplement stuff here, there's some breathing rate stuff, there's a bunch of stuff I've never released anywhere else. A bunch of stuff people are not even really doing at all yet. I'll leave that one fuzzy because of that. And then we go over what is the things you can do to improve this from the physiologic flexibility standpoint. And then we talk about what I call SIHT training, or super high intensity training. This is all about buffering pH, things like that. And how do you actually do breathing? What should breathing be? And what are different things that are going to happen as you're doing this, right? When do you want to generate hydrogen ions via super high intensity training? When do you not? When do you want to buffer them? When should you not? Again, everything has its own pros and cons. How exactly are you going to do some of your training here? So this is one on a U-stress pH model, doing 30-second repeats on the rower. How much drop rate do you allow? How do you set that up? All that stuff is in there. So I just wanted to highlight that because I get a lot of questions about how do you actually do the training for cardiovascular stuff. And I wouldn't say everything, but a huge portion of it is actually all included in there. So there you go. Thank you so much. There'll be a link somewhere around here for when this is open that you can still get into it. But wanted to do a rundown of everything that is in the course because I know it can be really confusing. There's a ton of material in here. I want to say total hours is probably close to 30, maybe a little bit over. But the nice part is you can go through it at your own pace. You can do one little modules at a time. And then if you have any questions, you can email me and I'll do whatever I can to help you out. So thank you so much. Would love to see you in the course. Have a wonderful day.